Greetings everyone, Bill Gibbons Crypto Hunt here with another video. This feature-length video is titled Release the Bodette Film. The Bodette film is a piece of lake monster footage shot by Peter Bodette and Dick Affolter near the mouth of New York's Ausable River, which feeds into Lake Champlain. If there are completely new aquatic species in Lake Champlain, the Bodette film may prove crucial in preserving them. Yet the film is not open to the public, and so the question must be asked, why? I would like to thank the YouTube channel Documentaries Crash Course Cryptozoology for allowing me to share this documentary on my channel. See a link to their channel below.
For centuries, witnesses have seen something in Lake Champlain that they cannot explain. The creatures go by many names: horned serpent, America's Nessie, champ. The evidence for the animals is scant. That is, it was. Could a video from 2005 prove the existence of a monster? And is science ready for what this footage may hold? Lake Champlain is a beautiful body of water. Surrounded by 2 states and 1 Canadian province, it is a unique area both geographically and historically. Something else makes Lake Champlain special, something that many say is completely new to science. For thousands of years, native tribes of the Champlain area have told tales of horned serpents that dwelled within the lake. Some historians believe these stories are even documented in petroglyphs found in nearby Brattleboro, Vermont. The natives, though, are not the only people who believe something different lives in this majestic lake.
It was on the west shore of Alberg. My daughter and I were swimming, and out of the water came Champ. And he's long, had a neck like this, and it scared us. And we jumped out of the water and went running to the beach. And so it was my daughter and I. But also, we've had other fishermen tell us that they've seen Champ in the water when they're out fishing. He came up, he looked at them, and he went down. And that's all I know about Champ.
And we were over at Port Douglas, New York, and we had just over there where we were right up over sunken docks and stuff from an old ferry landing. They used to drive the boats over there, let them off, and they'd get on an airplane or maybe even a buggy and go. But anyway, they were under the water. We just caught some perch. We brought them up the bank. This was probably maybe a 20-foot cliff type thing. And where we were on top, you could see for miles left and right. And we started cleaning the fish. We had caught them over these sunken docks. We started cleaning the fish, and all of a sudden I looked out and there was a wake. Comes a small wake, probably maybe 6 to 8 inches. And all of a sudden, out of the water comes a thing like this, like it looked like a dinosaur. Comes out and goes quite a ways, and made a wake probably, I gotta say, 1.5 feet, maybe even bigger than that. Big one anyway. And he went for probably maybe 20 feet out of the water. He was exposed probably maybe 3 feet, maybe, neck, and had sort of a scaly back. But, you know, other than that, I don't know what it was or where it was, but he was obviously getting fish in those dock areas.
I stayed in the window, and it was like a mist that night, foggy, and the dogs were pointed that way, and that's the way I was looking, was that way. And now you got to visualize this is all water, this is not sand. And out of the mist, I kept looking and I thought, oh, it's pea green, it's all moldy. And I didn't realize, I was so tired, what I saw. But I know now when I tell you this, it's not as tall. But
one more.
It was a dinosaur head, and the head was like this, and then it went in the water, and then there was a hump. And it come to the light. Well, the light was on the dock on this side, and it just stood there, or sat. Nah, I don't know. But anyway, there wasn't a ripple in the water, and even though I was looking at it, I couldn't see it move. But it turned.
No, you had yours.
And it went out in the water and was gone.
I've seen him or her, 3 times. And, I've lived in Vermont since '68. First in Heinsberg, Vermont, and the last 20 years right on Lake Champlain in Burlington. And I'm a writer, a novelist. There were 14 of us, and none of them had ever heard of Champ. So we were all sitting at the dinner table, and my brother and his wife were out on the screen porch, and he came running in and he said, come out quick, there's something strange going on in the lake. So we all rushed out, and it was summer, very hot day, but it was twilight, and the lake surface was very glassy. And so we went out and stood along the shoreline, and we could hear, although it was a very still night, we could hear waves breaking on the rocks as something in the water was moving up the shoreline toward us. And so when it reached us, we could see that it was some sort of serpentine creature, probably diameter 2-3 feet across, with sort of scales, sort of shiny blackish scales, and we estimated afterwards probably 30 feet long, and it was moving like with humps. At any given time you'd see about 4 humps sticking out of the water, so it was kind of slithering through the water, and it went right by us about probably 20 feet offshore. And so there were 14 of us standing there. We all saw it, and the people from North Carolina and Tennessee were just aghast, and a couple of us who were from Vermont said, "Oh my God, it's Champ." The second sighting was the next day, and a bunch of the little children were out in the motorboat learning to water ski, and my sister was out there with one of the little girls in the water helping her get up. And my brother, or there were 8 of us sitting along the shore watching them, and one of my brothers said, "Oh my God, look at that! It's that thing from last night." And we looked out and we could see the head and neck sticking out of the water, and it was fairly close to the water skiers. And we thought, "Oh my God, let's hope that Champ is a vegetarian." But it was almost as though the creature was watching the kids water ski, and then it dove, and it appeared to go right under the children and the boat, and then we didn't see it again, and we just kind of sat there in shock. And then the boaters came in, the children and my sister said, "The weirdest thing happened while I was helping Elizabeth ski." She said, "I looked down, and underneath us, I could have sworn I saw that thing from last night swim under us." So she had seen from her vantage point what we had seen from the shore. It was 2014, something like that. Yeah, 2014. And we were in a boat, and it was in September, and this time the water was also very calm, and school had already started, so there were no other boats, and we were down between Charlotte and Shelburne, in the middle of the lake. So at that point, the shore would have been about 4 miles away on either side. And we were just moving along pretty fast in our boat, and the water again was very smooth, no waves at all, and no boats. And we had been having trouble all summer with people swimming too far out and the boats not being able to see them. And my friend who was driving looked up and said, "Oh my God, there's a swimmer." And I thought, well, that's impossible. We're 4 miles out from the shore on either side. And so we cut the motor, and the momentum took us right up to this thing. And it was, I guess it felt the vibration of the boat, or it heard the motor or something, startled it. All we could see was this sort of log-like body in the water, but when it became aware of us, it started, I guess it was trying to dive, and so it came alive, and again it did the humps, and we didn't see the head at all this time. And it was moving so fast that we were incredulous, because it was throwing off a wake. It was moving so fast that there was this breakers coming off the side of it, and it seemed to last a long time, but I don't think it actually did. We were just kind of in this time out of time situation. It was diving, and it just seemed to go on and on, that this body was swiveling at quite a high speed, and then finally it just was all the way submerged and vanished. So that was the 3 sightings.
These eyewitnesses are not alone in their accounts, and much like the natives before them, some have had the luck to document their encounter. This photograph, taken by the late Sandra Manzi in 1977 along the shores of Lake Champlain, seems to show a creature. Manzi's photo is but one piece of evidence. In 2009, a local named Eric Olson recorded this video at Oak Ledge Park in Burlington, Vermont. The footage shows a strange serpent or turtle-like animal swimming through the shallows. Multiple other videos, photographs, and even sonar readings seem to suggest the presence of an unknown species in the lake. the subject of stories that existed long before the area was settled.
So when I took that picture, what I saw, and to where I took the picture, by the time I went and got to my, up to the table, grabbed my phone, came back down to the shoreline, it probably moved about 300 yards. What I saw, what caught my attention was the splashing in the water. And it looked like fish were feeding. Every once in a while you get a school of fish come through and it's choppy up the water, and that's what it looked like. But then it kind of, I saw that black mass, and then it disappeared. And I just followed and watched. And I was like, okay, maybe I'm seeing the front of a wave. Could be 100 different things on the lake. And it was out near Woods Island, which is an uninhabited island. However, people do camp there. So it's pretty much, a vacant piece of property, and it's a pretty big island because we've kayaked out there and, picnicked out there and whatever, and hiked around. So at the edge of Woods Island is where I picked up that black mass and got the photo, and then it just disappeared. This black thing come up and then go away again, and I was like, okay, you're seeing things. And, just kept kind of doing my thing and looked up again and saw this between the edge of Woods Island and the next point, which would be Lappin's Bay. And took a quick picture just before it disappeared again. Based on a lot of theories, I know Scott had talked about it when I spoke to him a couple times, and Katie had talked about it, that these creatures possibly go on land. And I was thinking, Woods Island would be a perfect place for them to go because nobody's on it. And if it was going to feed, I'm assuming that, like most larger creatures like to go into shallower water to feed. And that water is a lot shallower than, on the other side of Lake Champlain.
No piece of evidence is more captivating than the infamous Bodette film. It was on a day like any other in July of 2005 when Peter Bodette and Dick Affolter, two New York fishermen, set out onto Lake Champlain. The men boated to the southernmost mouth of the Ausable River. Suddenly, the men were approached by a large animal right under their vessel. Bodette grabbed his camera and filmed the following footage. What you are seeing is only a small portion of the entire film. It is what was aired on the ABC News Network in July of 2005. Not only is this not the full footage, it is not the full testimony. A scrapped interview with Bodette and Affolter, recovered by researcher and author Joseph Citro, details what the men claim really happened that day. Bodette and Affolter describe seeing a head the shape of a sledgehammer on a serpentine body, which left an S-shaped wake in the water. At one point, Affolter said he was afraid the creature would ram their boat. Perhaps the most interesting feature is what Bodette described as the moment the creature broke the surface of the lake, a moment in which the sunlight could be seen glinting off of the beast's eye. The available footage appears to show wakes in the water, and for a brief moment, the object that is making them. The object appears to have a long, slender neck, with a bulbous head attached. A closer examination reveals there may be even more detail.
What we have of the Bodette film is really just a few seconds of the actual length of the footage. It is approximately on screen, the animal, the alleged animal I should say, for maybe all of 2 seconds, 3 seconds in this piece of footage. But we do see some very interesting features. We have here this high-definition version of the footage, and it's right around this area when we start to see the animal actually come into frame. What we see, essentially, is the what appears to be similar to a head and neck, this kind of classic champ image, rearing up under the water towards the side of the Bodette boat, and it has this kind of almost sideways triangular head with these rounded corners and this very long, thin neck that kind of goes out deeper into the water. And what's interesting about the head shape is that it does kind of remind one of the classic horse head shape, which is where we get the term water horse from. But we also see that as the head starts to come swinging towards its right, we actually see it kind of, I guess you could say, change shape, but it looks more like what's going on is we actually see some new shadowing come in this particular frame. Some shadowing towards the end of the head, the point of the triangle, and what it even looks like is almost as though the shadow is being caused by an opening of some kind of hole towards the end of the head, which I suppose if it is a head, we would have to assume is the mouth of some kind. It's also in this frame that you see these kind of distortions towards the top of the mouth, which almost look to be little snorkels on the front of the head, like eel nares, which are, of course, what eels use to breathe and filter water through their system. And you've also got this sort of circular bump towards the top of what we might call the head, and the bump kind of has, it's on both sides, it would seem. And the bump is very reminiscent of the kinds of bumps that reptiles like turtles and other lizards have on the sides of their heads, which are often used as ears. So that's a very distinct and interesting detail to have on this particular subject. And in the next frame, that shadow is gone again. It's almost as though the mouth has closed. And then it swings to its side again, and we can see a different object come up along with it, which some have speculated to be a fin or a flipper. And what's interesting about that is it does have this very noticeable kind of lightning-shaped white line across it. And some have suggested that, as in similar champ sightings, this might be scar tissue along the body of the animal. Throughout the footage, we see these ripples and these wakes, but there's one in particular that I think is quite interesting. And it is this kind of circular shaped wave or ripple or wake that appears to kind of move up and down as though something has just come up and come back down, or is doing that very close to the surface of the water. And there's no vehicle attached to this specific wake. I mean, it's a perfectly circular individual pattern of wake, which is really quite interesting.
Not all researchers agree that the footage is of an animal. Dick Rayner, a researcher at Loch Ness, believes the footage to show a reflection of an object that is above, rather than below the boat, and that this object was intentionally built to resemble an animal like Champ.
And of course, in Rayner's analysis, that opening of the mouth as the head turns to the side is actually kind of, it's much more clear, actually, than in the normal footage. Rayner's frames that he was looking at do provide this kind of high-definition look at that particular moment.
A New York Times article from 2005 states that Melanie Stiassny, curator of fishes at the American Museum of Natural History, examined the footage in its entirety. According to the article, Stiassny concluded that the footage was unconvincing. Stiassny, however, declined to be interviewed on the same subject in the spring of 2020, claiming she had, in fact, never seen the footage. So what of others who have seen it? The late William Drangeness, a Lake Champlain researcher, was lucky enough to see the footage before his death in 2018. In conversations with fellow researcher Scott Martis, Drangeness expressed belief that the creature was not only real, but that it resembled something in the fossil record. This plesiosaur specimen, found in Luxembourg in the 1990s, is what Drangeness said the Bodette creature resembled the most. The long neck, the typical plesiosaur body type, and the forward-facing eyes match Drangeness' interpretation of the footage. At the time of its discovery, this species of plesiosaur, now known as Microlidus melusinae, was new to science. Strangeness, although one of the only researchers to see the film, is certainly not the only one to put stock into the plesiosaur theory.
Hello, my name is Scott Martis, and I'm a field researcher of the Lake Champlain creature. I've been doing this for 27 years. And here I am at the site of the Bodette of Falter Lake Champlain creature video. This happened in July of 2005. If you look at where I'm pointing over here, somewhere right in this area, the long neck and head looking object resembles a long neck and head of some sort of plesiosaur, which is a marine reptile that lived during the age of the dinosaurs. Potentially it could be interpreted as elongated flippers of some sort. That is possible. There are apparently other parts of the video that were not in the ABC clip, which allege to show a head that has a seal look to it. My involvement in this thing began probably 2008-2009 when I started working with Elizabeth von Muggenthaler, who is a bioacoustician from North Carolina, who is originally from the Charlotte, Vermont area. She came to Lake Champlain in 2003 to do audio experiments with hydrophones in Lake Champlain because she was doing a special about the Champlain monster for the Discovery Channel. She recorded sounds that resemble cetacean echolocation with a high-frequency component. Animal sounds of this high frequency are normally associated with active biosonar of animals, such as echolocating bats that use the echolocation while flying around to locate objects, and toothed whales, which also use it for the same reasons underwater. So it's a highly specialized animal behavior. So anyway, I began working with her in 2008-2009. She had been in contact with Bodette, and Bodette had given her a copy of the video under the condition she not show it to anybody else, and she tried to get work done on it. So I was never involved in the talk or the work she did with Bodette, but I did know she had it. She then told me that there was a sequence, it's not on the ABC film, where you see a seal-like head come above the water. There's many things that are still being debated. They're still debating today whether it's a vertebrate or an invertebrate. But it's probably classified as either a gastropod-like animal or a worm-like animal. In the 1960s, Professor Roy Mackal of the University of Chicago thought the Loch Ness Monster might be a giant sea slug of some kind. In addition to this, there was a University of Plattsburgh professor named Dr. Philip Raines, who also cataloged champ sightings. And he had the idea that what people were seeing were unusually large eels and unusually large sturgeons. But he did think there was a plesiosaur-like creature in the lake, and he thought it was probably a giant slug of some kind. So this theory has been applied in the past to Lake Champlain. Keeping that in mind, if one is suggesting that there are two swimming appendages of some kind of invertebrate, there was a prehistoric invertebrate known from the Cambrian period called Opibenia, which was built kind of like the Tully monster. It had flaps on the side of its body with which it used to swim with. So it's possible it could have something along the lines of that. That's a very unlikely possibility that something that ancient could have survived to this day in a freshwater lake, but it's not impossible. Myself, I'm inclined to think that whatever's in the video is probably a head and neck of some kind. Loch Ness researcher Dick Rayner has stressed that it might be some kind of manipulated mechanical object that is being reflected into the water and is filmed from the top to make it look like it's in the water when it's actually being reflected in the water. He had the idea that it might be some kind of fill pump hose, and he actually asked me in 2009 2016 to look around the boat docks around the Burlington area for hoses that looked like it, and I couldn't find one. And another important part of the video, which is called Much Controversy, is behind the neck-like object. You see some kind of box-like object seemingly in the water. Nobody knows what it is. I mean, it is an object in the water, or is it being reflected in the water from the side of the boat? It looks like a squarish-looking object. One opinion of Rainer's is it looks like a track or machine. It's ambiguous. You can't really tell if it's in the water or if it's on the boat being reflected into the water. So, you know, I mean, obviously this demands further investigation. What you have to work with is highly ambiguous. So we don't know. It could be a big object hanging off the side of the boat. It could be in the water. We just don't know. It's possible it could be one of those buoys too, because it's generally believed that the film was taken around some buoys. In 2017, me and William Draginna were in his boat. We came over here to this same area, same general area, to do some investigating because of the fact that the video had been shot here years earlier. You can look at some comparison pictures from the boat that we took that day, and you can see background geographical landmarks that resemble objects in the background portions of the Bodette video from the ABC clip. So that probably means the same area. Like I said, we were there on the night of July 4th, the evening of July 4th, 2017. Some mysterious object swam underneath our boat or moved underneath our boat. We were in 50 feet of water. The thing was down about, I think, 20 feet below the boat, moved around for about 2 minutes, swam right to left. Looking at the screenshots we got of the object on the sonar screen, Will had forgotten to put the SD card into the sonar, so the best we could do on the spot was to take photographs of the screen. But anyway, looking at the object on the screen, we estimated this was probably about 10 to 13 feet long, which is really large. And it looks like a round-bodied large object with a thin appendage coming off it on the left end, roughly the shape of maybe a plesiosaur or a large turtle with a long neck. We didn't see any impressions of flippers or anything, but that could have been because the flippers were at the side and were merged with the shape of the body. But that was our hit. There does appear to be, at the end of the long appendage, at what could be interpreted as the head, are two little prongs that might coincide with the reports of snorkels or horns on these monsters that people have seen over the years, including sightings from here, Loch Ness as well. Later that night, I was listening to the hydrophone and recorded some clicking sounds that resembled the 2003 echolocation sounds that Liz von Muggenthaler recorded. Very faint, but they did resemble the sounds from 2003. At any rate, this video and this area, because of all these different things that I've talked about, is worthy of further investigation.
My involvement was as a scuba diver. I've been certified diver since I was 15, and as well as underwater videographer, photographer, and just, you know, pretty much camera photography. Hutter Creek was a fun time. We went down there, we set up some trail cams. Me and Karak actually went and waded out pretty far in the marsh just to go and get the cameras near the water because water was pretty low this year. And also we heard my brother yell up from the road, and we ended up running up there, and he said he heard a huge splash, and Karak got up there before I did, and then he heard it as well. Him and Ryan heard it, and then I got up there, and we actually heard it again. And these splashes were absolutely huge. I've heard carp jumping up there, you know, fish jumping, and these sounded like a pile of bricks being dumped into the water. And you know, we spent some time there. We were there during the day too. We went and checking out some of the artifacts and stuff like that along the shore, Otter Creek. The first day we had some problem with the scuba gear. It was pretty uncomfortable, tank moving all over the place. So next day we went back, you know, got the proper gear. We went to go do a preliminary dive check, as where I'm diving, I'm down below, but I wasn't that deep. And Ryan was free diving, snorkeling above me, and he had his camera. And as it started to get dark, I went and I heard this weird sound. I thought it was in my head at first, like I had an air bubble in my ear, something weird. And then I looked up at my brother, and he's pointing to his ears, because he had actually heard something the day before, and I didn't hear it. But he's pointing at his ears and stuff, and I'm stopping and I'm listening, and I can hear this thing faintly. But with the scuba gear, you know, you get the regulator and the exhaust where, you know, your spent air comes out, you know, the bubbles, makes a lot of noise. So what I did was I came up, took off the BC in the tank, just inflated it, and let it float, and just grabbed my snorkel and my mask, and just went and floated. And what I heard was unbelievable. It sounded just like echolocation, like what you would hear a marine mammal produce. It was clicks, subtle clicks, and then louder clicks and clacks, and it was subtle but sharp at the same time. I can't reproduce it with my mouth, but you know, like something that I've never heard before. And I've gone and swam in who knows how many lakes, ponds, scummy ponds, rivers, the ocean. You know, like I said, I'm a diver. I've been diving since I was 15. And like, you know, when I'm in the water, I just go and I feel like I'm in my element. But I've never heard a sound like this, never. And laying there floating, listening to it. And my brother, he's right there, and he's listening to it. And it's getting darker and darker, and it's still going on. And people are all leaving and stuff. And we actually went and we were in Arnold's Bay, and Arnold's Bay is just south of Buttons Bay. And we had gone. We actually started swimming out towards the entrance of the bay, towards the actual lake, and the echolocation, the clicks and stuff we heard, they got louder, more direct, and it was only for about 5 seconds. But it wasn't like whatever was making it when it came closer to us. It was like it increased its volume and the direction, like it directed it towards us, like to see, you know, what's going on here, what are these things doing. And my whole, like we were up there for a while, you know, it was dark when we get out of the water. And what I think goes on is that these animals, they go and they use direct location. You know, once it starts getting dark, you know, the people activity, human activity goes and dies down. Like your boat traffic dies down, your people on the beaches, you know, pretty much goes away, you know, disappears. And so it's much safer for these animals to, you know, come out at night, be nocturnal. And so I think that they use the bay as like a corralling point, you know, where they will go sit at the mouth, project their echolocation into it. First see, you know, all right, is there fish in there? And then use their echolocation to come in, group up the fish, you know, because fish will go in a bait ball to protect you know, themselves. And so, and pretty much just corral the fish inside the small bays and inlets and stuff, rather than chase them all around, the middle of the lake. It just makes sense to me because, look how many even land-based animals do it. Ambush prey, bottleneck, just it's like a predatory, like orcas. They do it with seals. Dolphins, they do it with fish. So it's crazy. And the echolocation, that was recorded by Liz von Muggenthaler from Fauna Research, Animal Communication Research, in what was it, June 2002. She went and her first hit was in Button Bay, just north of us. The other one was in Hunters Bay in New York, and then the third one was in Tom Farm Bay. We use Tom Farm Bay. Yeah, Tom Farm Bay. All small. Well, Tom Farm Bay is decent size, but all bays, that are kind of shallow. Some of her recordings were taken during the day, but I don't know. But it's an experience that like I was just telling you earlier, that I wish I could go back to and just absorb every bit of it.
It's a compelling idea. Lake Champlain's prehistoric past of being open to the sea certainly keeps an evolved plesiosaur viable. However, some have a different idea of what Champ might be. Ruby Anderson, a researcher of the Lake Champlain phenomenon, has her own ideas about the subject in the Bodette film.
We got in touch with Scott Martis, and he put us in touch with Son Logan's father and Jerry Manchia Cooper and Dennis Hall. And so we've done a couple of expeditions with Dennis and Scott and Martis together. The fact that they seem to be similar to whales and dolphins. They're working in a coordinated effort to cut out the fish, hurting them in the shallows. They use echolocation. That would seem to indicate that it's a mammal. My daughter and my son-in-law showed me the PVC photos. There are other people in the camp that want parts of the photos. And then I looked at the other end of it that kind of appeared to be like the head. We realized that it looks like there's a large turtle shell on the back. And one of the other pictures that appears to be the head of the turtle. So it looks almost like there was a fish or a eel maybe possibly trying to get away from the turtle.
Interesting. So you think that the thing that people say is a head and neck is actually a separate animal to the actual...
In the moment, yeah.
Interesting. I didn't know that. Okay. Have you ever spoken to anyone who has seen the film after they had seen it?
Yes. Elizabeth on Marvin's owner has seen it in its entirety. I don't know if she signed a confidentiality agreement because she didn't really say much about it. After she saw it, she just said that we needed to see it too, and that some of the things that I had said previously were right. She didn't really go into any more detail about it.
Chuck Pogan is a researcher from Florida who has had his eyes on Lake Champlain for a long time. He, too, believes Champ could be a species of giant, long-necked turtle.
Water is too cold for reptiles. It's like, there's 5 species of fully aquatic turtles that live in Champlain. They rarely come out of the water. So everybody kind of overlooks turtles. They're never considered, even, knowledgeable people like Lauren Holman. So if you've got 5 indigenous fully aquatic turtles living in Champlain already, it's not a far idea that this could be a turtle because they're already there. And snappers rarely come out of the water. They got another turtle called the musk turtle, which puts out a
Some witnesses, such as members of Ruby Anderson's family, believe Champ is something reminiscent of a classic sea serpent. Could this explain the body described by Bodette in the transcript?
We wait around, watch around, wait sunset, didn't see anything. So we're going to go to bed. And, they try to get up real early in the morning. So around 10:30-ish at night, because it was dark then, we hear what sounds like an animal being killed. So, and it was really loud, and there was a lot of splashing. We were maybe 20 feet from the beach. So, I tried to get up and, go see what was going on. But either adrenaline or whatever. 15 minutes later, everything quieted down, calmed down. In the morning, we went and take another look and see what's going on there. We see a set of deer prints coming out from the woods down to the edge of the water. And they stop right there. They don't go anywhere else. They don't go back up in the woods. You don't see any deer prints in the water, in the sandy part. So our speculation is something grabbed the deer right there off the shore. We got there probably to the island from the ferry. The ferry didn't take you there. Maybe like 6 o'clock, 6:30. It was like 100 degrees out. It was wicked hot. So we bring our stuff to our campsite. My brother Matt says, "Oh, let's go take a look around." He takes his camera with him, and he comes back like 20 minutes later. We went out to the shore on the island, and I said, "I got the camp photo set up," and he looked at me really with a serious look on his face, and he said, "I saw it, and it's not the size they say it is." I said, "What are you talking about?" He says, "It's a lot bigger than what they say it is." I said, "Well, you had your camera with it." He said, "Yeah, I know. I was kind of stunned that I didn't take a picture of it." And I said, "Well, what did you see?" So it looked like the one he saw. It looked like a gigantic snake. He saw the coils in the water. He saw it moving through the water. And he told me it's over 60 feet. It could be a lot longer. He didn't know.
Other theories include giant seals, Tanystropheus, and the Tully monster. Giant seals provide an interesting prospect. Large, predatory seals like the leopard seal fill in many of the same biological roles that plesiosaurs filled. Tanystropheus, a Triassic-age reptile, is similar to Champ, but would need to change its morphology drastically to have survived to the present day. It is also known that the Tanystropheus was not as widely aquatic as Champ is seen to be. The Tully monster, a bizarre animal of its own, explains many of the descriptions given, but not all of them. If it is real, what is Champ? Plesiosaurs certainly match. Could giant turtles, similar to long-necked or map turtles, explain the humps in the water? Or are more bizarre animals to blame? Have we any evidence to suggest one theory or the other? Perhaps tracks could be a good indicator. These tracks, discovered just outside of the Kingsland Bay State Park, resemble those of a crocodilian. They are slender and have long, thin toes. Does this mean these animals are not only amphibious, as some sightings suggest, but that they are crocodilians? Further examination calls this into question.
The Kingsland tracks are really interesting. We have here this digital depiction of the Kingsland tracks by our anonymous artist who's seen the actual photograph, which has since been taken down. And what's so interesting is that this is a depiction of one of the longer tracks, apparently. And it looks very much like a crocodilian track. I mean, it's almost identical. It has the long, narrow heel, it has the webs between the appendages, and it has these very long digits. We actually also in the corner have a depiction of what a track that would literally make that imprint would look like. Now, we say literally because the artist pointed out there was something of a caveat in this. In the original photographs, the artist identified a type of leaf, this kind of small autumn leaf in the corner right next to one of the tracks. The artist was also able to identify that it looked like a rather small red oak leaf. And so there was something to go off of for size, because there is a kind of range to how big and long red oak leaves can get. Looking at that, we find that a particularly big red oak leaf that hasn't been sort of done in by the autumn temperatures can get rather big. But if it's small and has gone through some weathering by the weather around it, we find that it might only be a few inches long, if even that. And what's interesting is that we can estimate then roughly how long these tracks might be. And what's so interesting about them too is that you have two tracks. You have the long one and you have one that's about half the length with a rounder and more stout heel. And that track looks very much like a snapping turtle's track. Now, going off of the size of the leaf, if we were to roughly estimate, it's not at all out of the question that that is a snapping turtle track. The question is, what about this long track? Well, the long track might simply be a byproduct of the snapping turtle kind of having to drag itself through the mud, because snapping turtles are rather hefty turtles. So they not only make these kind of large belly impressions because they're so low to the ground, but they often, when going through rough terrain like mud, have to kind of flex out their digits and drag themselves a bit, which is a perfectly logical explanation for what would otherwise appear to be a crocodilian track in the Kingsland Bay photographs.
A potentially more compelling piece of evidence is the Hall fragment. Discovered along the shores of Lake Champlain by former researcher Dennis Hall, the fragment is believed by some to have been the remnants of the skull of a champ. It displays the infamous horns described by Native American accounts, and, interestingly enough, bears some resemblance to other horned animals.
This is Dennis Hall allegedly found it. In 2009, I got an email from Liz von Muggenthaler with 2 black and white pictures showing this skull cap of something, asking me, what is this? So she put me to the task of trying to identify what this thing could be. Allegedly, Dennis found it at some point in the woods around where he lives in Patton, Vermont, which is on the eastern shore of Lake Champlain. You've seen the pictures. There appear to be at least 3 of them. Altogether, there's 4 pictures, but 2 of them appear to be the same picture that has been cleaned up and maybe colorized. But the other 2 appear to be different. You see different objects in the background. There's nothing in the picture to scale it. What it looks like is a skull cap of some animal with 2 horns coming off the crown of it. And there's nothing to rule out the possibility it could be a piece of bark with 2 limbs coming off of it that just coincidentally looks like the skull cap of an animal. So the first thing that comes to mind is some kind of horned ungulate, like say maybe a deer or a sheep or a cow or a goat. Now, I've shown it to people and they've said that deer don't have horn cords like that. In other words, the horns of a deer and the horns of a cow are separate pieces from the skull, which is why you can take them off the skull and mount them. Whatever this is, looks similar to a sheep or a goat or possibly a giraffe. Now, when Liz von Muggenthaler asked me to look at it initially in 2009, I kept coming back to this Eocene horned alligator called Ceratopsuchus that lived in Wyoming, and fossil giraffes had a similar skull cap to it. So obviously the problem with that is that, you know, all the giraffes live in Africa and Asia. There's a bighorn sheep out west in the Rocky Mountain area that resembles it too. The fact that Pleistocene fossils have been found in Vermont doesn't rule out the possibility that this is something from the Ice Age, because we found, you know, the Charlotte Well skeleton not too far away from Addison County in Charlotte, Vermont. So that's a possibility, but to my knowledge, there's no evidence that these bighorn sheep that live out west in the Rocky Mountains ever made it this far east. So I think it's highly doubtful that it's a Pleistocene fossil of a bighorn sheep that lived in Vermont. Now, there are sheep farmers and goat farmers in Vermont, and there have been for hundreds of years. In Winooski, Vermont, where I used to live, there's an old woolen mill that has been turned into an apartment building. So obviously there was an industry of sheep farming for wool and harvesting the wool that's been going on here for hundreds of years. So it's possible this could be the skull of a sheep that somehow wound up out in the woods. I don't know. Dennis has never made any claims that this is the skull cap of a champ animal. All he claimed was to have found it. But obviously Liz was interested in it, so she had me to look into it. Now, looking at the flip side of that argument, there's no reason why there couldn't be a plesiosaur with horns on its skull, because we already know from the fossil record that there were horned alligators, horned turtles, and horned dinosaurs. So there's no reason why there couldn't exist a horned plesiosaur. Now, if we're dealing with plesiosaurs today in Lake Champlain, they're 65 million years removed from the ones we know in the fossil record. It's not impossible. The closest thing that we have found to a horned plesiosaur is a plesiosaur from the early Cretaceous of Australia called Eumenosaurus. It has crest over its eyes and over its nostrils, and it's got a crest running down the middle of its skull. And it lived during a time when there was a cold snap. During the late Jurassic and early Cretaceous, there was not really an ice age, but a cold snap. And they believed that during this period, there was ice at the poles, and there would have been ice in the water that this Eumenosaurus lived in. So it was a cold water adapted plesiosaur with these horn-like crests over its eyes, its nostrils, and running down the middle of its face. It's a highly unusual animal. Exploring that idea further, the Indians in this region, on both sides of the lake, different tribes had a belief in a giant horned serpent that lived in Lake Champlain. Now, this type of horned serpent mythology or belief, or whatever you want to call it, is widespread among North American Indians. There is a petroglyph in Nova Scotia that shows this creature with a long neck that looks like sort of like a plesiosaur, possibly a long-necked turtle with horns. So this may be significant. I don't know. One thing I did notice is that if you take the skull cap that Dennis found and layer it over the famous gargoyle head picture from Loch Ness, it kind of fits. Now, obviously, that picture is very controversial. Many people believe that a tree stump that was retrieved from Loch Ness in 1987 is the object in the gargoyle head photo. Other people don't believe this, but it's interesting. And I have one really good champ report with horns on it. Tommy Heinrich observed while fly casting from a boat. 20 to 45 feet long, head shaped like a horse's head, a long snouted face, eyes visible, 2 small horns sprouting from the creature's forehead, gray or rust colored. And this was originally reported in the Ithaca Journal newspaper in Ithaca, New York, February 15th, 1971. There's a book about the Abenaki Indians called The Original Vermonters, and it has a section, I'm going to read directly from that. It says, quasi-human beings also include several varieties of underwater creatures, all of which were natural enemies of humans. Stories were told about them in winter when they were safely confined beneath the ice. One variety was some kind of giant lizard about whom Gordon Day has been unable to elicit information. Another variety was a great serpent about which Gordon Day provided the following information in the film Prehistoric Life in the Champlain Valley. And this is a quote from the text from the film. There are many stories of his being seen in different places. In one of my best stories, he figures in the common theme of a girl being seduced by a snake. He often has been mistaken for a log over which someone walks or drags a canoe, then discovers it was a serpent's body. His presence in quiet bog ponds is detected by a boiling of mud and trash up from the bottom. There are several places which are pointed out as former dens of this serpent and from which he went out. The draining of several former ponds is accounted for in this way. In one detailed story, he was first thought to be the head of a deer swimming at a distance. Since he had horns, later as he got closer, he was seen to have had a head not like a deer, more like a horse. Some thought of him to have been a great shaman who only sometimes took this form. You know, these horn-like objects are very rarely reported, but they are a common theme that pops up in different places, you know, like Loch Ness. You've got the Finley Report from 1952. Rowan Watson was able to track down Mrs. Finley's son recently and re-interview him, and he confirmed the old account from 1952, where they saw these 2 snail-looking blobby horns. People speculate what these could be, if they're just horns or if they're snorkels or what, you know. We just don't know if they're invertebrates. It would make sense that there's some kind of feelers of some kind, like a snail. The skull cap that Dennis had came from an invertebrate. It would almost certainly have to be some kind of an exoskeleton. Now, while I don't rule out the possibility that these monsters could be some kind of giant worm or slug, for them to have an exoskeleton like an arthropod would be highly, highly unlikely. So I don't know. If it was an exoskeleton, you would expect what you see in that picture of the skull cap to be more of a different texture. More like a chitinous, smooth skin like you see on the exoskeletons of beetles and stuff like that, you know. Another CHAMP researcher that worked with Dennis relayed the information that skull disintegrated. So, as far as I know, all we have left are the photographs, which, you know, you can only do so much with. My personal opinion is that a more conventional answer, probably along the lines of some kind of sheep that died from a sheep farm or something like that, is much more likely than that this is part of a CHAMP animal. But I can't rule that out either, so we just don't know.
Overall, the Bodette subject seems to be an amalgamation of all these ideas. It looks very much like a plesiosaur. But it also resembles a turtle, a snake, and even more reptiles. Might the Bodette subject, and CHAMP at large, look something like this depiction? The question of whether or not an animal such as Bo might exist goes hand in hand with the question of why that might be important. If real, a species such as CHAMP would change our understanding of the evolution of animals on our planet. It would rewrite zoology books.
The area of my expertise, you could say, is GIS technology, which I used to teach my high school students back in the Todd High School. I'm also an animal tracker, and I've tracked animals throughout North America, South Africa, and Nepal. My research interest is to try to understand how people are learning to live with a large predator such as the tiger. And Nepal is a really great place for that because they have been living with tigers ever since people have lived there. And so they have a whole much different approach than we would have, as well as a different perspective. And so I was really interested in how different that is. What are some similarities between how we look and view wildlife in this country, and then perhaps maybe we'll be able to get some deeper understanding. So that's kind of my area of interest and a little bit of my background. It's really a large part of wildlife management is really managing people. And they, like I said, they have a unique approach because they have areas that are set aside as national parks or reserves, really kind of based on the North American model of doing that sort of thing. These were traditional hunting grounds by the royalty for hundreds of years, if not thousands. And they employed the native trackers in the region to be able to find the tigers, and with the aid of elephants, they were able to, of course, surround tigers and rhinos, because they have a one-horned rhino there in Nepal. But then when the royalty decided to give up the land for national parks, it's like, well, these were areas that were still traditionally used by the people there, and they were kind of upset, so they were trying to come up with strategies to help them to win over to protect the tigers themselves, because that's a big part of tourism that evolved, but also an important part of the ecosystem and their traditions. Yet use some of the resources that are in the national parks or in the surrounding areas. So what they started to do is set up these buffer zones around that, because they knew that these would be corridors that could eventually expand the range of tigers, increase the population, and then maybe have the tigers move to other reserves through these corridor actions. And so they really worked with the communities, and it really is a community-based approach of how they go about it. It's so much different than what we have. And so how do you go about enticing younger people who are really looking for jobs in the city or better paid jobs to be able to do something like become a tracker? And of course, some of the trackers there are also ecotourism involved. And so there is an avenue for doing that, but you got to find ways and incentives to entice the younger people. So I spent a fair amount of time in South Africa, and rhinos has been one of those things that is covered by CITES, the Convention for International Trade of Endangered Species. And they've thought of different strategies. I mean, for one thing, what they try to do with the elephants, which is another endangered species, that they had all these ivories that were confiscated, or they got from dead elephants or what have you. And what they tried to do was to flood the market to lower the prices to hopefully lower the demand, but it really didn't, because once they were gone, they were gone. And so they thought about maybe we could maybe do that with rhinos, because the rhino horn actually is like your fingernail; it'll continue to grow. You cut it off, as long as you don't cut it too deep, it'll grow again. And so they actually could be farmed in that sense. Again, they would flood the market and hopefully to lower the demand. Well, it really isn't working out that way. And then also you have where the rhinos are at. Sometimes they're in private reserves for people to go tour, and others they're in national parks. But these national parks were once native land that people who lived in those areas, and they are finding themselves, or at least they found themselves, locked out and benefiting economically from that. And that's beginning to change in South Africa, for instance, which I'm more familiar with. where they are offering opportunities for people who live on the edges of these national parks or private reserves, that they would be able to gain control of them and set up their own ecotourism business. And by doing that, where they see that there's benefit from protecting the animals that they want people to see, you're less likely going to get people who are poachers, because poachers are often people who are local or have a relative who is local. And they're the ones that are going to be going out there, and they're getting a few $1,000s, which for them is a huge amount of money, and getting out there onto the black market. To be honest with you, it's rapidly losing out on that battle with rhinos and with elephants. Their ranges are decreasing. There are many other people who are doing this sort of thing. And that's what's really the gratifying thing, is that there are lots of people who are moving in the right direction. It's just that we don't have the inertia to really have a systemic change throughout. But it will have to happen. That's my belief. If we don't, then ecosystems will collapse. Basically, then us and other species will go along with that. We're already in the mass extinction, the sixth mass extinction. It's happening at a phenomenal rate. It's beyond what would be the normal extinction rate. We're dealing with one that has not been since around the extinction rate of the dinosaurs. Even though that was quick, we're on course for that type of mass extinction where 95% of the species will go extinct. In a relatively quick order, not like in my lifetime, probably not in your lifetime, but in a few hundred years, perhaps. But we'll see the beginning of the end in the next coming decades as systems begin to collapse, I believe. I would rather believe that we could do more than just stave it off. We could come up with a new kind of equilibrium, if you want to call it that, at least a sustainable means. And then nature is very resilient, and if you give it a chance, it can bounce back relatively quickly. When I say relatively, it's not within our lifetimes, but relatively quickly. So if we were to put a moratorium on commercial fishing in the oceans would rebound back within a lifetime or two of people. And that would be beneficial for all. And like I said, if we change our land use practices, including farming practices and so forth, and what we have kind of in the industrial approach, we change that to where we are spending more time in investing in the soil and bringing back the biota, the soil back, which will help to sequester carbon, allowing forests to grow back in areas that they have been removed. These are things that will help to sequester carbon. And there will, of course, there will have to be some technological changes that will go along with this in terms of our uses of energy and where we get our natural resources from. We're going to have to, material science is going to be like one of those expanding fields where we have to try to find new ways to make the things that we use, but are what I call a dirt-to-dirt economic system, where things have a cycle, okay, that they'll break down and they'll eventually become part of the soil, or where have you, at least it's broken down and not something that's thrown away. Those atoms are completely locked in for thousands and thousands of years and not getting their way back into the system. Because as we take more stuff out, there's less stuff that's going back into that system in that respect. So our economic systems are going to really have to change as a response to sorts of things. There's a lot that has to happen in order for us to maintain ourselves as a viable species, as well as many others that we touch their lives on, plants and animals.
If the Bodette film is genuine, and is as clear as some witnesses have claimed, it could help propel science and conservation into seriously investigating and even protecting what would certainly be an extremely rare species. Why then is the full footage kept so secret?
Basically, the Bodette footage, from what I know, is a piece of video that's alleging to show some sort of a champ creature in Lake Champlain. It was released, I don't know exactly when it was taken, but I believe it was released in 2006. and it debuted. This was really before YouTube or anything, and it was shown on ABC News out of New York. And in this piece, they said that two upstate New York fishermen had captured this very interesting footage from Lake Champlain.
Right.
And in the video itself, actually purports to be at the mouth of the Ausable River, which is one of like 6 or 7 major rivers that feeds into Lake Champlain. It's part of the watershed area. And the Ausable River actually goes up. If you go upstream, it goes to a place called the Ausable Chasm, which is this really cool kind of cliff area. A lot of people do like recreational activities there, but it's a big river that feeds into Lake Champlain essentially. And they purported to capture this serpent-like creature that was bobbing up and down on the surface, and they said that it swam under their boat, and they saw flippers in the head very clearly. And the video itself that was shown on ABC, which is really one of the only available copies to the public, little tidbits of the film, isn't that great. It doesn't show very much detail, but you can see in some parts what looks like a flipper, what looks like a snake-like head, also ripples on the surface of something that was in front of them. From what I understand, they were, they're fishermen. Lake Champlain is a world-class fishing spot. I mean, it's one of the most biodiverse lakes in North America. 90-plus species of fish, really big fish, so it's a great spot for fishermen. These guys were locals that had been fishing there their whole lives. So what happened was, I guess they came across this thing, in their words, and they had a trolling motor, which is a type of motor that fishermen use to, it's like a silent motor. You use it so you don't spook the fish or the wildlife you're trying to approach. So they turned off their large motor and engaged the trolling motor, and that's how they were able to kind of get on top of this thing and have some sort of an interaction for an amount of time. When they released this footage, I guess they would have had ownership over this over a decade ago when it was released in 2006 to ABC. And now it is under the ownership of an entertainment lawyer in northern New Jersey, in kind of the New York City outskirts area. This guy, his name is Scott Chagin. I'd have to look into my records to indicate exactly what the name of his firm is, his law firm, but he does entertainment law. So he is in possession of this footage now, which I think is quite interesting. And there's speculation why he would have acquired it. I've heard the rumor multiple times from people that are a bit more informed about it that there was some sort of a divorce settlement in which this lawyer from New Jersey, Chagin, was involved and happened to receive the footage as part of a payment from one of the either Bodette or a Folter, whoever really claimed to have ownership over the video, because it's called the Bodette film or the Bodette footage, but obviously both of them were involved, a Folter and Bodette. So again, this lawyer is now in possession of it, and that's where I think the story gets a little bit frustrating and sketchy, particularly for those of us who are interested in some sort of transparency or something, that would be more satisfactory with being able to view this film. I contacted the law firm of this lawyer in an attempt to hopefully secure a bit of the footage to be able to use in my documentary series. And I'd been warned by people that he would not basically give me any of the footage, and I would not have any permission to use any of it, but I tried anyway. So I had made contact in about, it was, I want to say, late 2017 to 2018, I contacted the lawyer, and I'd been put through to the secretary, who I believe it was a phone call. I wasn't, actually, I called into the firm, and the secretary said, I can take down your information, I can have him contact you back. And so he did contact me back via email and said, what can I help you with? And I then explained my purpose. I said, I'm doing an independent series on Champ, and I would really like to use a little bit of the footage, nothing where I can post the entire footage. I understand that there is, you want to the entire footage, there's like a value to it, but maybe a small portion of it. And then, as soon as I said I basically didn't have much money to give out for this because I was doing this on a shoestring budget, very modest amount. I didn't have, multiple grand to dish out for this footage. I didn't get any response back. So then I attempted to contact ABC to see if I could license footage from them from when they had their debuting of the footage in 2006. I thought maybe, they'd probably be pretty expensive too, but I thought it might be a workaround way to use the little chunks that they had. ABC was given full permission to use every part of the video by either Chagin or the fishermen who had it in possession at the time. I don't know at the time, but they said that they could use the entire portion of the video, and they only used small segments, and apparently they didn't even use the best parts, as I was told, which is interesting. So I contacted ABC, and they basically just said either contact the lawyer or a Folter or Bodette. So they kind of boomeranged me back to those guys.
I see.
I tried Chagin again, and I just didn't get a response. So, I mean, it was... so Bill Dranginis had actually, when I interviewed him about the Champ subject and his research in general, I got to ask him about viewing the Bodette footage. And from what he told me, he was extremely interested in the footage. He had contacted the lawyer in New Jersey and had driven up there from Virginia, or the D.C. area where he lived. So it's not like he was real close. You know, he drove a couple hours to go see this footage in its entirety. He was allowed to see it. He wasn't allowed to take any pictures or anything. But he was actually able to view it in its entirety, and he came out with a conclusion that it showed some sort of plesiosaur-like creature. And he said that he thinks ABC didn't use the best sections of it. Upon viewing the footage, the law firm had asked him to sign an NDA, a non-disclosure agreement, which he disagreed. He did not want to sign one. That was not part of the contract that was not part of the agreement of just seeing the film. So he basically, I don't know if they wanted him to just not talk about seeing it or not blow the lid on it or anything, but because he wasn't under a contract, he had no obligation to them to not share the story with myself or with other people.
Under the Endangered Species Act, an emergency concerning wildlife might be declared if there is sufficient evidence for such an emergency. If the Bodette film truly is real, then it might just be that evidence. If so, there may not only be environmental concerns surrounding the footage, but even legal ones. All that has been available to determine that is analysis and second-hand accounts, as well as the countless sightings around Lake Champlain.
It gets frustrating, but it's also just exciting, you know? There could be something completely new that no one knows what it is. It could be its own species of animal. And as me and you said before, the whole point is, you know, release the Bodette film. If there is this footage that they go and they claim that they have for the lawyer there, then get it out there so that we can get proof that these animals exist. Hopefully be enough to prove. That way we get their protection, not just protection for the animal, but for the whole ecosystem. You know, all the sewage, like raw sewage gets dumped in Lake Champlain, like millions of gallons a year. That's disgusting. Runoff from farms, which, you know, I understand farmers need to make a living and stuff, but they need to figure out just, you know, something with the runoff from the pesticides and fertilizers and all that stuff. You know, because you need to protect what Champ eats, this animal eats. They need to protect what Champ eats, you know, and on down the line. And otherwise they're going to be gone, and we might even get a chance to go and know what they are. You know, you might be gone before we even go and get a chance to.
I hope they never get Champ, because, you know, he's been here, and like I said, what a nice documentary. On top of the water, under the water, see, it's how joyful. And you take and box him in, what's going to happen? He's not going to be an aquarium big enough to do their justice. Just leave him alone. Take your pictures, but leave him alone.
Let him have his lake.
I just don't want anybody to catch him. In fact, if they're going to hurt him, I don't even want him to come in.
There are plenty of Champ eyewitnesses, but not that many Bodette creature eyewitnesses. Except, that is, for one man. What you are about to hear is the testimony of someone who has seen the Bodette film in its entirety. He, like many Champ eyewitnesses, believes not only that this species exists, but that its time may be running out, and that the Bodette film could save it.
just like he's going, what the? And they come up to this thing, and it's just kind of sitting there a few feet under the water, just hovering. And he's going, what the hell is that? Well, that's when he stops. The thing just sits there, and that's when you see all these long, slender things come into view. You see what looks like a plesiosaur neck snapping at you. There's something different other than these long, wavy things that are kind of, in your face when you look at that big yellow thing that you mentioned. That's the shell. It's a good-sized shell. I would guess it was probably about 6-foot long shell. The big turtle head back by the shell. You see something come above the water in the general area. Looks like a seal head. It's like black, and it actually glistens, cruises up to the thing. It's like I say, it's just kind of hovering. All of a sudden, you see something coming broadside at the boat. Well, this other thing is just kind of sitting there, and it's another camp animal. Well, I mean, it's going like a bat out of hell. It comes right at the boat, broadside. Pete's got the camera on it, and at the last second, it goes under the boat, and Pete takes the camera and swings it to the other side of the boat, points it in the water, and the thing he runs out of footage, runs out of batteries, and that's the end. So there's just a couple of sequences